Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Velvet, Salem and Coco? Huge shout out to NeonZangetsu for this story. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. His head hurt. Actually, scratch that. The damn thing didn't just hurt, it felt like someone had cracked open his skull, yanked out his brain, flailed it around like some mad musical instrument, then shoved the swollen mass back into skull and sealed the whole thing shut. In short, ouch. Much ouch. Lots of ouch indeed. A familiar sigh echoed through his mind. Feeling better now? Yeah, I'm good. Naruto laid his head back against the burnt grass, glowering bloody red daggers at the sky above. Got it out of my system mostly. Hashirama raised a mental equivalent of an eyebrow. You sure? Nope. He was still proper pissed off. The blonde took a deep breath. A slew of invective burst from his tongue, curses so imaginative as to send birds wheeling from the trees above. If words could kill, everything would be on fire. Sadly they couldn't. Thus, he was left sprawled on his back, lying in the middle of nowhere, clad in little more than burnt and battered rags. Hardly the best way to start one's day, really. Hashirama chuckled, which only made his head hurt all the more. And they say I'm the angry one. Bite me. On pins and needles he forced himself upright, propping himself up on his elbows. Mistakes were made. His entire body had quite literally fallen asleep, and moving proved an effort. He didn't feel quite right, but at least everything seemed to be intact. Good. At least he had all his important bits. He shot a baleful look at his marked hand, wondering if it was to blame with this. Probably. Sage chakra didn't interact nicely with what had been doing, again. Then came the questions. Where was he? How had he gotten here? He remembered an explosion. Then light. A scream. Memories were slow to return, thinking proved a painful process in and of itself, one that hurt like hell. The past returned in fits and spurts, gradual recollections that left his head aching all the more. He grit his teeth against it, shook his head, and massaged his temples with one hand. There, it was all coming back to him now. He'd been practicing with some seals, trying to expand his repertoire among other things now that the war was over. Didn't like the idea of being a one-trick pony, you know. Maybe it was petty of him, deciding to branch out now of all times, but why not now? Almost every jutsu he knew stemmed from either shadow clones or the Rasengan. Kakashi and Sasuke had all manner of tried and true tricks to fall back on. Sure, he had Kurama, but the nuclear option wasn't always the best option, you know. In any case, something must have gone wrong. This wasn't his workshop. Which meant. He wasn't sure what it meant. He stood with a grimace and noticed something else. Barefoot. The grass tickled his singed feet. The hell? Did someone steal my shoes? Pretty sure you blasted those clean off. You're lucky you still have legs. And there's something else. Naruto missed the rest, lost in thought as he was. Luck, Kurama had said. He wasn't feeling very lucky right now. Surrounded by trees as far as the eye could see, with not a soul to be seen really, it made him feel pretty damn unlucky. The trees weren't right either, their trunks were black, but their leaves were red. So was the grass for that matter. Stranger still. He could sense something looming in the distance, but it felt old and cold and so very angry. No, several somethings. They were cold. Why so cold? Like running his hand over dry ice, it made him recoil without thinking. Where the hell am I? Perhaps I could be of some assistance. I believe we're somewhere in Forever Fall. Naruto pivoted, glancing behind him. No one to be found. Who said that? I did. You just couldn't keep your mouth shut, could you? Kurama's voice all but dripped caustic vitriol. I was building up to it. Going to be nice and gentle about all this. But knew you just had to jump right in. Stupid knight. Naruto turned the other way around. Not a soul to be found. Hey, not funny. Stop hiding. I am not hiding, came the insufferable response. I'm right here. The tan fist swiped out, obliterating a tree. You're not. I suppose I should be blunt then. That most unfamiliar voice hummed once more and belatedly, he realized where it was coming from. Hello there. Nice to meet you. My name is. The words fizzled to so much static inside Naruto's head. Because that was where the voice was. Inside his head. It was in his head. In. His. Head. Panic reared its ugly head in his heart. Nope. He had enough experience to know where this was going. Out off me head. Please, do not be alarmed. I mean you no harm. Naruto grabbed the first tree he could find, reared back, and slammed his skull against the bark. The tree toppled with an almighty crack. He was left unharmed, it only made his headache worse. He grabbed another tree, tore it up by the roots, then squeezed it for good measure. It shattered in his grasp, spraying him with splinters and sap. Whatever it was, it clung to his ragged clothes and only aggravated him all the more. Get out. Of my head. The voice sounded contrite. Would that I could. I tried to tell you. Kurama drawled wearily over his own panicked breathing. This idiot's been banging about in your head for the last hour, asking all sorts of questions while you were asleep. And before you ask, no, he wasn't there one moment and the next, he was. I'd say it's a jutsu of some sort, but this doesn't feel like it. Incredulity burst out of him in a frazzled shout. Ha, why is there an old man in my head? No need to be rude. I'm only a few centuries old. Too much. Naruto bit his lip and choked down the reflexive urge to scream again. Calm. Calm. Deep breaths. He wiped the sap off his chest, scowled when it stuck to his hands, and gave up entirely. He'd find a river or something to wash it off later. In the meantime, time to address the elephant in the room. Or forest, as it were. Alright, what the hell? He growled. Who the hell are you, and why are you in my head? If this is some kinda trick by Orochimaru. Orochimaru? He felt a quiet curiosity that wasn't his own. The duality confused him further still. I don't know that name. He's telling the truth. Fool damn near wet himself when he saw me. You can't fake that kind of terror. Quite. A sheepish laugh greeted him. As to how I got here, I'm afraid that's a bit of a long story and an embarrassment on my part. Suffice to say my enemies must have finally managed it. Managed what? To kill me, of course. But you're talking to me. The voice coughed. And your point? You wouldn't be talking to me if you were dead. Which I am. You're clearly not, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. Kurama howled with laughter, dark and exultant. He has you there. Yes, quite. He heard the voice muster itself to retort, ready to rally, only to pause. Fair enough. Dying isn't the problem for me. It's staying dead. I'm afraid I suffer from something of a curse. When I die, as it were, my soul leaves my body and enters that of a like-minded individual. A sort of forced reincarnation, as it were. It's not something I can control, much less predict. An actual note of annoyance crept into the man's voice. There's more to be said on that matter, but I mean really, poisoning my coffee. Does her depravity know no bounds? Ouch. Naruto found himself wincing despite his earlier objections. I mean, yeah, I'd feel the same if someone spiked my ramen. Food is sacred, you know. Well. There was an actual pause between words. Is this what pride in someone else feels like? Unfortunately, it's overshadowed by all this unyielding disappointment. Hey. Not towards you, my boy. Came the immediate response. I was referring to the matter of my death, which is really the least of our concerns. Still, you're being remarkably calm about this now. Am I? He fought down a nervous laugh, all his terror and dread threatening to bubble back up again. That's probably the shock talking. I'll probably freak out again any second now. For lack of anything else to distract him, he picked a direction and started walking. The voice in his head didn't protest, so he took that as a good sign. He could feel those presences creeping closer. Best to walk in another direction until he sorted things out in his head. Still, he could only endure the silence for so long. Weary of walking without aim, he walked up a tree and ignored the curious noise the parasite in his head made, climbed as high as he could, then kicked off a dark bough, launching himself forward. How long can you do that? Long as I like. He rose to the bait without thinking. What's your name? My name? I can't keep referring to you as a voice. He caught a branch, swung over it, and kicked towards another tree. You must have a name. That actually drew a smile from the wayward whisper in his head. He could hear it in his voice, even if he couldn't see it. I've gone by many titles in my time. More than I can possibly remember. These days I can only recall the more infamous ones. Ozma, Ozymandias, Auden, Orion, Oswald, Oliver O. And of course there was Olaf, Octavius, and Otto. Starting to sense a pattern here. Agreed. Why do all your names start with the letter O, for crying out loud? You know, I never did figure that out. I believe it was some sort of cruel cosmic joke. As for this one. The pride in his voice was nigh on unmistakable now, not arrogance, but the simple satisfaction of one who did his job and did it well. You may know me as Osborne, headmaster of Beacon Academy. Which made his silence all the more stifling. Grim? Huntsman? Aura? The bodiless voice mocked him. Does none of this ring a bell for you? Naruto tilted his head. No. Told you it wouldn't. Oh, dear. It seems you friend was right after all. You're really not from this world at all, are you? Buddy, you're the third wheel here, not us. Naruto ducked under a low-hanging tree branch and flung up an arm. Now who's being calm about things? When one excludes the possible, all that remains is the impossible. You're the impossible one here. He grumbled under his breath. Kurama and I didn't ask for a passenger. Osborne sighed the sigh of one who'd heard those words a great many times. As you seem so keen on reminding me. However did the two of you befriend one another? Well, that's a long story too, hey. Naruto growled as he experienced a faint itch in the back of his head, a familiar one. He had let Ino root through his mind shortly after the end of the war to make sure he didn't have any lasting injuries. This felt much the same. Albeit he missed her smile and not the old currently playing hopscotch in his head. Oi. Don't go looking through my memories without permission. My apologies, force of habit I suppose, still, this is fascinating. His chagrined voice peaked with an almost childlike glee as he kicked off another tree and launched himself forward. Wonderful, even. You're the strongest being I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I hardly need to train you at all. Although you don't have aura. May I? Naruto grabbed a tree in mid-leap and rested himself to a halt. May you what now? Why, unlock it, of course. Osborne continued with all the patience only a teacher could possess. The two of you have souls, even if you are from another world, thus it stands to reason that you have the potential. It's the least I can do after all the trouble I've caused you. Some might have been tempted by the prospect. He wasn't. We don't need more power. It is not power, but protection. Osborne countered. Aura is of the soul. A gift freely given and but a small step on the path to making amends between us. Yikes. And they called him the persuasive one. Might I take your silence for acceptance? Fine. I better not regret this. Then allow me. Allow what? For it is in duty that we achieve immortality. He felt a spectral hand settle on his shoulder. In that instant the old man's voice took on a low cadence, shocking him into silence. Through this, we both remain and become a knight, an eternal sentinel of justice and hope, protecting all. Through my mind unbound by death, I release your souls, and with my wisdom, render my aid unto thee. Something sparked in Naruto's chest. It felt like laying on a warm grassy field on a bright sunny day, wrapping himself in a wool blanket and drifting off to sleep. He steadied himself atop a tree, gripping the black bark for balance. The wind rose around him, rustling the red leaves of forever full overhead. There wasn't any pain. He wasn't sure why he'd expected it. Hashirama made a startled noise of his own. So that's what it feels like. Impressive. Most impressive. His aura was a strange blend of red and gold. He could see it crackling over his hands, rising up his arms. This feels pretty nice. I imagine it does. There was a bone-crushing weariness in the old man's voice now, a fatigue pressing down around his temples. You have two souls in you in addition to myself, it stands to reason you'd have double the aura. You may even develop dual semblance in time, though I dare say with your skills you won't need them. A jaw-popping yawn rattled in his head. You alright? My, that was tiring. Unlocking your aura was easy, but as to your friend I overestimated myself. I need to rest. And you're not going to try and take control of my body when I do? Osborne yawned again. How could a soul yawn? I think that would be rather poor start to our partnership, don't you agree? So to be clear, you're not forcing me to do anything. A poignant pause followed. I don't think I can. Hashirama huffed. Damn straight you can't. No, that's not it, the old knight replied after a drawn-out pause. Your body is unlike any I have ever inhabited. I could not assume direct control of you even should I wish it. If anything, it feels as though there is a wall between us, even now. You'd have to lower it for me to affect you. Someone besides Kurama using body. Nope. Not having it. Don't count on me doing that anytime soon. I don't trust you enough for that. Understandable. I've given you a great deal to think about. There will be more in the future. Rest assured, I did not ask for this, nor was it my wish to place this burden upon you. The words humbled him. Look, I'll try to find a way to get you out of my head. I was learning a bit of seal work before I landed wherever here is. Remnant. I have a great deal to tell you of and to warn you of when I awake. Fine. He shrugged a shoulder and dropped out of the tree line. Maybe then I can find a way extract you and place you in a proper body. Nothing would please me more. He could feel Osborne's presence dimming in him, preparing to rest. It's quite cramped in here. Well, excuse me. You're excused. Something lunged out of the brush at them. Naruto had time enough to see black fur and a white mask, then it was upon them. Or rather, him. The Grim. Quickly now. Osborne's voice prodded him. Push your aura to the forefront. He did as best he could. Claws skirted harmlessly off his chest. Huh. Neat. So that was what aura did. It took no small amount of concentration on his part, but he was certain he'd get the hang of it in due time. Couldn't be any more difficult than chakra. Practice makes perfect after all. In the nanosecond it took the creature to balk at him, Naruto caught it by the throat with one hand, lifted it up had he always been this strong, and slammed it down on its back, stunning it. A furious growl greeted him as it swiped blindly at his face, trying to tear him to shreds. Again, golden red sparks sprayed as its paws failed to find purchase. From there he stomped down on its chest cavity, conjured a Rasengan to his right palm and raised it high, then brought it crashing down. Naruto smash. That about summed it up. The poor Grim dissolved on the spot. Hashirama offered a low whistle in the back of his head. Well, would you look at that? Marvelous. Ozpin agreed wholeheartedly. I knew you had it in you, but seeing is believing, as they say. Would you mind climbing at that tree over there for me, Naruto? There's something I'd like to, another yawn now, see before I nod off. I expect it will be some time before I awaken again. Best do this now before my resolve falters. On a whim, Naruto complied. It was easy enough to break the tree line. Effortless, even. A few quick leaps carried him upwards, and then he was through to daylight. From there he caught the highest point of the tree he could and held on for dear life, using it as leverage to see what lay beyond. And what a sight it was. A sea of red trees stretched out on either side of him, glistening in the mid-morning sun. The leaves caught the light just so and almost seemed to glow under his watch, as though they were aflame. It took his breath away and for a moment it seemed nothing could possibly return it. Ozpin nudged him gently. To the north, if you would. Naruto looked that way, still perched on the tree. I don't see any There in the distance, so faint as to barely be a memory, he spied the distant spires of several grand towers. It almost looked like a castle from here. He squinted toward it, to no avail. What is that? Beacon Academy. Ozpin offered a wistful, if sleepy sigh. For countless lifetimes I have run it in one form or another, watching over future generations of huntsmen. Yet it has left me stagnant. Predictable. Enough for someone to poison me under my very nose. I have grown lax. Complacent. No more. A change of pace is in order. Your arrival here presents a unique opportunity. We mustn't waste it. He didn't like where this was going. What about your school? Don't they need you? I believe Glinda can handle it for the time being. He heard a wry smile in Ozpin's voice. I must apologize once again. You did not ask for this burden. No, but it could have been worse. Much worse. Thoughts of Orochimaru came to mind once more. At least Oz couldn't wrest control away from without his say, so if he was telling the truth. Time would tell if he could trust him. And if not, well. Kurama had burned souls out of him before. He didn't relish idea of doing that again, even said as much. Thank you for that. Which is why it pains me to ask this of you. Ask what? Naruto sputtered, not quite comprehending. No, no, and no. He shook his head and turned away from Beacon. I ain't attending a school. I did enough of that in my first life. There's nothing they can teach me there. I quite agree, but entering Beacon may become necessary in the future, if only to catch the culprit behind this. He set his face in a mulish pout, drawing a sigh from the old soldier. I'd happily make you headmaster if I could, but you're much too young and unknown to many. There would be questions. Yeah, no. I'm not qualified to take that position. Probably wouldn't even if it was open. I am well aware. Ozpin sighed. Which is why I'm offering you a compromise. The blonde brow quirked upward. I'm listening. There is a great darkness coming. Its name is Salem. The Grim you fought. She commands legions of those blighted creature. Imagine hordes of them, monsters that defy all creation. Worse, she has those who serve her willingly, human pawns that want nothing more than to tear this world down for their own base desires. Well, didn't that just sound peachy? I shall tell you more of her once I have rested, but suffice it to say she has grown bold enough to strike at me in the heart of my power. Soon she will grow bolder still. The current generation is all but a loss. We must prepare the next for her. On that note, how do you feel about recruiting? Kurama groaned. I've got a bad feeling about this. Recruiting? Naruto's brow shot into his hair. Recruit whom? Whomever you like, wherever you like. Remnant is brimming with potential. Find those with it and train them. Prepare them for the storm to come. Naruto considered it. That, I could do. I've saved one world already. Can't be that hard. The pause that followed proved a lengthy one. This may be a tad more difficult than you think. There are things I've not yet told you. He scowled. You holding out on me, old man? I am not. The old headmaster sounded almost ashamed by his suspicion. Rather, that is not my intent. There's no point in keeping secrets between us. You're the strongest ally I've ever had, bar none. Secrets serve no purpose here. I'll gladly tell you all once I've rested. The maidens, Salem, all of it. Fine. Ozpin perked up. You'll help me, then? Just like that. Of course he was going to help. Just who the hell did he think he was? He'd never been the sort to turn his back on those in need. Not before and not now. So yes, he would help. But on his terms. There was a difference. He could sense Kurama's muted approval. The true hero never turned his back on those in peril, and while he didn't exactly like the idea of having someone else in his head, he couldn't deny that this world was in dire need of a champion. So why not? What did he have to lose? Ino would have laughed at him if she were here. That's just like you, isn't? Always headlong into danger. He missed her. I'm no one's lackey. He turned back to Beacon at last, choosing his words with infinite care. If we're going to do this, we'll be partners or nothing at all. Deal? I would accept nothing less. Ozpin hummed in his head, visibly relieved by his agreement. Then we are agreed. What say you? The ghost of a smile touched whiskered cheeks. Oz, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Said friendship would herald the dawn of a new age. But that is a story for another time. This was his curse, it seemed, to have this headmaster in his head. Some said curses were terrible things. If this was going to be his curse, might as well embrace it. Summer Rose was a vengeful woman. Call it a character flaw, call it a curse, or even a baneful blessing, but there it was. She'd ever been the sort to avenge any wrong she encountered, whenever and wheresoever she could. It was simply her nature. She had to fight the good wherever that fight was to be found, no matter what. If someone was in danger, if an innocent had been harmed, if a loved one taken from her. Nothing would stop her from wreaking vengeance. In that way, her righteous fury paired rather nicely with her semblance. Maybe that made her a bit twisted. Meh. Most huntresses weren't exactly sane. By that very logic, she could stand what happened to Ozpin. Sleep wouldn't come easily to her tonight, not with her thoughts buzzing about in her head like angry fire ants. The silent ceiling of her bedroom offered her no solace, and even Taeyang's arms wrapped around her brought her precious little in the way of comfort. He at least was a sound sleeper. Not so she. No matter how close she snuggled to him, she simply couldn't slip back into slumber. Instead, whoever had poisoned Ozpin would pay. Simple as. She'd already decided. His unexpected demise had set Beacon back months, if not years. The world was lesser for his loss. But he would be back, she knew he would. Ozpin always came back, his curse wouldn't allow for anything less. And when he did return, the pebble bounced off her window, snapping her back to alertness. In an instant any hope of sleep was gone. Had she imagined? Tap. Summer squirmed from Taeyang's arms. Something rattled her window again, a larger pebble this time. Her eye twitched as she patted towards the glass pane. Who could that be at this hour? Didn't they realize this was a bad time? It was well past midnight for crying out loud. Tap. 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 Ignore. Maybe she could sleep. Tap. 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 Sod it all, that torrent. If that was a drunken crow, she'd shave that birdie bald. She snatched her axe off the dresser, ripped the window open and thrust her head out into the gloom with a hiss. What is it? Her anger was rewarded. A lone figure stood just shy of the porch, lantern in hand, the low light hiding much of their face. As she looked on aghast, they actually raised a hand and dared to wave her way. If they'd come here trying to take her eyes, they were being awfully unsubtle about it. Can I have a word with you? Their voice didn't ring any bells, it didn't sound like crow, even if the cadence was somewhat familiar. Alone, please. She'd give them more than a word. Summer yanked on her white cloak, shimmied her way out the window and launched herself at the intruder. Poor bastard, they didn't even try to defend themselves. Ultimately, the complete lack of said defense saved their lives. Twisting her body, she landed just shy of them, alighting in a pointed crouch to squint into the gloom. An unfamiliar visage stared back her within the waning lantern light, all bright blue eyes, whiskered cheeks and tawny blue hair. She'd never seen him before in her life. And yet. Hello, there. He smiled at her merrily, the very picture innocence. You must be Summer Rose. I've heard a lot about you. There were many strange things about him, but perhaps strangest of all was the cane clutched tight in his offhand. She knew that cane. Her eyes widened. Ozpin. The boy beamed. In the flesh. More or less. He'd found a new body already. No, wait. She scowled. This could be a trick. It wouldn't be the first time one of Salem's agents pulled this before. How do I know you're really him? Naruto paused. Beeped his head, as though he were listening to a little voice in his ear, one only he could hear. And then came the smile. You originally wanted to name Ruby Crescent. He snorted out the last word, trying not to laugh. Strange name for a kid. Pete. Rancor. Shyam. Hey. Crescent Rose would have been an awesome name. She sputtered, realizing the truth he'd spoken. I mean, anyone could. Know that. Naruto's blue eyes glowed gold for a moment, then faded, his voice deepening an octave as he shifted his posture just so. I suppose you're right. The warm tingle of Ozpin's voice shot through her, and too late she realized her mistake. Shall I remind you of your infamous landing strategy in the Emerald Forest? Her face went red for all the wrong reasons. Meep. But perhaps you remain unconvinced. Ozpin planted both hands on his cane and smiled. Very well, do you recall the time I caught you and Raven in that closet? If memory serves, the two of you were drunk out of your minds and wearing nothing but. Summer seized the younger man by the shoulders. You swore never to speak of that. Ozpin's grin, because this was him, was decidedly of the shit-eating variety. Speak of what, Miss Rose? Why you ow? She gave him a mighty shake. Switched back already. I'd rather talk with the other guy. Why are you even here anyway? To have you deliver a message to Glinda and to warn you of Salem. He paused, wincing but a little as though he'd heard a voice all Ho's own. Yes, I was getting to that Naruto. Quick as can be, he looked back her way to have his say. We may have found a way to deal with her, but you must hold the line until such a time. No missions, no leaving your daughters unprotected. Do you understand? Summer blanched at that. But people need help. Osmond pinched her cheeks firmly between both hands. Do you understand? Double meep. A white, I do. She wailed as his grip intensified. I'm sorry. Good girl. The reincarnated headmaster released her and patted her head instead. I appreciate your cooperation in this matter. As if she had any choice to begin with. She knew Allah's would just beat her ass and sick Goodwitch on her. There was no escaping that wrathful woman. Fine, she muttered, rubbing her now aching face, but you make it sound like you're leaving. Osmond didn't make a sound. Not a word. No, he was oddly quiet. Are you? For a time. He sounded happier for it, and she certainly didn't miss the rueful little smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I cannot tell you what I intend, for that would reveal my hand. Sounds to me like you're taking a vacation. His grin grew another inch. Rest assured, I am not. Tell Glinda she'll be receiving quite a few exceptional students soon. Osmond. He stepped back. And on that note I must away. Naruto. Assume control. Summer made a wild grab for him. Get your ass back here. Too late, he vanished in a streak of gold. I won't become you. Osmond winced as his erstwhile ally vaulted another log, crashed through a bush and raced up a tree. All this in an instant. He didn't think he'd ever get used to the boy's speed. In a matter of minutes he'd departed Patch entirely, raced across Vale and taken them to another continent altogether. Such determination. Such power. Such speed. Truly, Naruto would change the world. I understand the sentiment and I shall endeavor to prevent the process so long as I can, but… No. Naruto cut the old wizard off mentally and physically with a slash of the hand as he lumbered over a log. You don't understand. If we're doing this, and we are doing this, I won't be you. I let you have control back there with Summer, but maybe don't be such a little shit about it next time, yeah? I'd rather remain me, you know. He winced. It is not that simple. Nah, not happening, not on the table. Many have said so in the past. All have failed, much to my regret. Everyone fails until their first success. The whiskered warrior shrugged a shoulder and kept going. Guess we'll have to be the first. A though seemed to occur to him just then, momentarily distracting him from their journey. How long does it take? Osmond considered not answering. It might be more kind but no. He owed him the truth. I cannot say for certain. The time varies. Months, years, decades. I shall refrain from using what little magic I have, however. That will only accelerate the process. Was it always like that? Not always. Wistful nostalgia nudged at him as he remembered his first host, ages ago, when he'd been at his prime. Once, when I had my full power, it took quite a bit longer. Decades. Noted. Kurama pushed himself to the forefront, lengthening their stride as they devoured the distance to their destination. Now, then, are you going to explain why we're out here in the middle of nowhere? You had us run across the ocean for crying out loud. Why are we wading through the wilds here in Mistral? His soul grimaced, unaccustomed to such withering attention. There's something I wish to collect from an old associate of mine, Raven Branwen. Or rather, someone. Now seemed as good a time to reset the board, as it were. I suspect she won't give it up easily. Naruto's face and perhaps his own twisted in a grimace. Look, if you split your power among these maidens and you're not happy with the job they're doing, then just take it back. Can't be that hard. Oh, yes. Yes it could. It absolutely could. I have thought of such before. But you never tried. The accusation made him wince. Did you? No, he admitted reluctantly, and that very admission cracked something deep within him. I have not. Why not? Why indeed? Shame, regret, powerlessness, a whole host of factors were at play. It had seemed such a good idea at the time too, a way to keep the relics out of Salem's hands. The Four Seasons, or at least the first four, had been good people. Trustworthy. Noble. Kind. It was they who first lifted him from the pit of his despair so long ago. He owed them more than words. But time had a way of souring even the most noble of ambitions. Splitting my might among those four sisters greatly diminished me, as you well know. And he did. He told Naruto everything, spared no detail for his expense. I had thought the magic would return to me upon their eventual deaths. I'm guessing it didn't. It did not. He admitted, more than a little shamefaced. That was an oversight on my part. And creating the vault seemed such a wise idea at first. I have made many mistakes. That was but one of them. Kurama snorted. So you say. Naruto didn't respond for some time. He kept moving, throwing himself forward, leaping from tree to tree in stoic silence. By the brothers, he really could move when he wanted to. He didn't think he would ever get used to this kind of speed. Were they going to ignore him, he wondered. Hopefully not. The silence was suffocating, cloying, choking. Look, Naruto shattered it with a sigh, you're not a bad guy, Oz. You've just made some bad decisions. How he had longed to hear those words. You're not a bad guy. Isn't it remarkably how 5 little words can breathe life back into your sad soul after so many years and restore the very crux of your being? The relief he felt was unutterable, a cool glass of water on a hot summer's day. He wasn't a bad person. There had been years, decades, centuries even, where he wondered about that. If it wouldn't just be easier to let go and let Salem win. To give up, give her what she wanted and let it all end. He had lost friend after friend to her, entire families to her, and he suspected more might be lost by the end. Yet here at last, he felt something. It rather felt like hope. Thank you. That settled it. This boy would do great things. Then, he must be protected at all costs. To that end, he would endeavor to educate him as best he could, shield from the evils of the world. And endeavor to get him laid. What? Such goodness must be preserved, and the world of remnant was in dire need of proper protection. And besides, the bloodline must continue. If one Naruto was powerful, then his descendants would rattle remnant. Salem wouldn't know what hit her. Achoo. Salem sneezed mightily. Someone must be talking about her again. Blasted Ozma. It wasn't difficult to locate the Branwen tribe, by contrast it was downright easy. Too easy, some might say. And perhaps it was. Raven's tribe didn't even try to hide, they'd camped out on a plain just outside the forest, easily visible from the hill. What are your plans? Meh, he cracked his knuckles. Never been big on those. Naruto waded in, when the guards tried to stop him, he started winging. It felt remarkably freeing to not have his hand on the wheel for once, to simply sit back and watching things unfold as it were. Naruto was an able fighter to begin with, but the true potential lay in his speed as much as his technique. He battered aside bandits like straw dolls, sending men and women flying with great sweeps of his hands, spiraling spheres and more. Inevitably they caused enough chaos to gain her attention. Are you Raven? Vernal dangled from his fist and gurgled weakly. Screw you. No. He tossed her over his shoulder to join the rest. Alright. Next. The bandits cowered before him like the craven cowardly lot they were. That much was to be expected, Ozpin found. After all, he hadn't yet told Naruto what Raven looked like. Perhaps that was a mistake of his, but he'd rather enjoyed watching those brutes be beaten down. Their kind believed in strength over weakness, and now the strong had come to claim them. Almost fitting, really. Movement in the crowd ahead claimed his attention. Useless, the lot of you. A familiar voice pierced the din. Step back, you idiots. Leave him to me. Triumph blazed through Ozpin. At last. Redemption. Naruto quirked a brow. You seem excited. I am. Let me handle her. He frowned. Why? Raven is my student, my problem, my mistake. And didn't it just burn to say that? Through my own action and inaction, I accidentally molded her into the monster she is now. Please allow me to correct her. A weighty pause followed as they watched a masked woman with dark hair shoulder her way to the forefront of the crowd. And by correct you mean? I shall beat her within an inch of her life, take the power from her, and drag her back to her family to face judgment. Alive, he amended after a moment's pause. With your help, I believe we can successfully claim her power and return it to me without causing excess harm to her soul. Keep your word or you'll never get control of my body again. A nod. You have my word. Break it and I'ma break you. Him and his promises. Of that I have no doubt. Raven heard none of their exchange. She was already drawing her blade. I don't know who you are, but you've got some nerve coming here. Kurama rumbled a laugh. Alright, then, wizard. Impress us. Make this count. Naruto ceded control to him once more with a bemused noise. As ever, assuming direct control of a new body was something of a lurch. There was that brief second of freefall, a moment of weightlessness as his weary soul stepped out of the black and took center state. In a way it was like shrugging off one coat and donning another. His shoulders sagged for a second before he found his center, balanced himself and lifted his chin. Power. So much power. Enough to tackle armies, leap into the sun, unmake the very world itself. Was this how it felt to be a god? Don't get ahead of yourself. I'm no god. So humble. That already made him leagues better than the brothers. A demigod, then. Your heritage speaks for itself. Naruto only grunted. Don't go breaking or changing anything in here. Worry not, he tittered in return, I'll be quite occupied with this. Because you see, Raven was staring at them. Nothing to say. Ozpin unclipped long memory from the boy's belt, drew it forth with a flourish, then planted in the ground and laid both hands upon it for good measure. I thought you would be happy to see me after all these years. Every word dripped the most bitter of sarcasm. Are you not entertained? Miss Branwen was not. Indeed, Raven's face had drained of all blood, rendering her already pale visage white as a sheet. It was a good look for her, Ozpin felt. She had always been a bit skittish, but seeing her as the cowardly craven she was now reminded him that whatever her flaws, she still feared him. You? Me? He offered her a benign smile and a courtly bow. Were you expecting someone else? No, you can't be here. She paused, choked on the word, then swallowed as though she had a bullfrog in her throat. Now there was a thought. Perhaps he should have turned her into one all those years ago. Clearly a bird was beyond her. You can't be. Not yet. You just died. And how would she know that? Did she have a hand in his latest demise? Perhaps. But perhaps not. In the end it didn't matter, not a jot. And yet here I stand. He shifted his stance ever so slightly, drawing his right foot back, even as he shifted his left foot forward. On that note, I'm afraid I must ask you to return the maiden's power now. You've had your fun. Her shoulders tensed, hunching inward. I have no idea what you mean. Now, I don't be coy. I can smell it. Dirty old man. In the air. He finished with a bemused smile. It stands to reason that you would keep such a power close, and that slip of a girl I just felled clearly did not have it. As you're the last woman standing, the onus falls upon you. Now, he offered her his free hand. Will you relinquish it freely or must we make a mess of this? Raven tore the mask from her face with a snarl, revealing blazing red eyes fanned by flames. Never. I'm sorry, despite her fear, he couldn't quite keep the smile from his face. Your compliance really isn't a factor here. Naruto made an impressed noise in the mind they shared. You're angry. I didn't think you could get angry anymore. Oh my, he was. He couldn't recall the last time he'd been this furious. How quaint. Nothing else for it, then. His hand cracked out in an open palm slap and Raven jerked back clutching her face. Why you? Enough. He unbuttoned his collar and strode forth with a jaunty step, humming under his breath. Class is in session, Miss Branwen. Let the lesson begin. Raven hesitated, braving Omen in both hands. Of course she did. She'd never been a match for him before, even in her prime. But her tribe, what was left of it, was watching her. She had no choice but to fight. No choice at all. She descended upon him, Omen a bloody red blur. The only lesson here is your death. Threats now, Miss Branwen. How gauche. This is hardly a backyard brawl. The air tickled his cheek as he evaded her first strike, an overhand sweep. Slow. Sloppy. Sad. He swayed between each of her slashes with contemptuous ease. You fight like a younger woman, Raven. Admirable but mistaken. Fear has defeated you. For every word he dodged 3 attacks, then 6, now 9, 12, easily blurring between her blade. You've stopped training, stopped believing in yourself, stopped growing stronger. Allow me to demonstrate. He swayed under Omen and drove long memory into Raven's knee with an awful crack. Her aura held but her leg twisted painfully. He was wearing her down. He could see it in her face, her expression twisting first in fear, then horror as he kept up the attack, forcing her back again. All this time raiding villages and picking on the weak has led to your downfall. He pressed the offensive, hammering her with a trio of blunt strikes that battered her pride as much as her aura. Cowardice has defeated you. Shut up. She hurled him away with a rush of wind. I'm stronger now. Stronger than I've ever been. Stronger than you. Hardly. Naruto could have taken back control from him at any time, he had no power over him, much less his vulpine friend. But they let him forge ahead, take out his anger on her. Raven had no such luxury, no helping hand to be there for her, no allies to spur her on. She couldn't afford to retreat, not here, not now, not with her tribe watching, because if she fled now, she would never have a place among them ever again. Not that she had much of one now, given that they decimated most of her tribe. Brah. Oh dear, he'd forgotten all about her sword. He slapped Raven blade aside with the flat of his palm, rendering her lunge a clumsy thrust that didn't come anywhere close to him. Are you quite done with your temper tantrum, child? Because she was to him. So many were, with very few exceptions. When one had naught but eternity to measure oneself against, it was hard to find an equal. For the longest time Salem had been the only constant. That had changed with Naruto and Kurama. His spirits had never been higher and now, confronted with one of his many failures, he was feeling boyish. Enough to take no small amount of pleasure in teasing his former protege. Hold still so I can skewer you. And now you stomp your feet. He shook his head, setting Naruto's bang swing. Shall I spank you as well? Raven lunged at him with a yowl. Predictable. He took a step to the side, let her sweep by, and drove a fist into her solar plexus. Chakra flashed and a satisfying whoosh filled the air. It was the sound of Raven's lungs collapsing for a brief moment. She toppled to the dirt like a felled tree, choking for precious oxygen, desperate life that proved slow to come. My. He tutted softly. I'd forgotten just how satisfying it was to get my hands dirty. Perhaps I should do this more often. There's a certain satisfaction in it, you know. Brave gurgled wetly at his feet, wasted and gasping for air. Osmond nudged her ribs with a shoe. I'm sorry, did I break your concentration? She groaned and clawed her way upright. That is a terrible reference and you know it. Pardon me for appreciating the classics. Now stop embarrassing yourself and get up. The lesson has only just begun. He sensed the power of spring stirring long before she used it. Yang's mother had a decent grasp on her, the maiden's power, but only that. It wasn't true mastery, not as he knew it. Raven could channel in a given direction, create constructs of pure elemental energy perhaps, but little more. She was not a fully realized maiden, not matter what she might think. Freya alone held that title. Raven flung up a hand, fire flickering at her fingertips. Die. Tried that, it didn't stick. Here and now, with the brunt of Naruto's power and mind working in tandem with him, it was the merest of matters to deflect the cone of fire, step aside and oops. He overshot Raven in his haste, accidentally checked her with his shoulder, and sent her sprawling to the dirt like a naughty child. Forgive me, he rounded on her, mildly embarrassed. I'm still getting to this body. You say that, she righted herself with a growl, wiping blood from her mouth, but does your new host know what you are? Trying to drive a wedge between them, was she? How droll. Oh, yes. I think I've been rather honest with him. Naruto radiated smug contentment. Get her. Osmond got her. Yang's mother answered with another cone of spiraling flame, but this one he cut clean through. She came in hard and fast in its wake, swinging in low for his face in a rising slash that would surely savage him if he let it connect. He stepped in, let Omen pass harmlessly over his head, and drove an open palm into her solar plexus. Raven reeled with a startled croak, her body bowing as her aura flexed. Contrary to proper belief, aura did not negate pain. It merely protected your body from undue harm. Hit someone hard enough and they'd still feel it, strike quickly enough, and you might even get past their aura before they could bring it up altogether. Such was not the case for Miss Branwen, she had far too much practice, her control was instinctual. But she was not accustomed to pain, that last hit had stunned her, and he took full advantage to hammer in another blow. Heady. He swayed aside from Raven's follow-up lunge like the fencer he was at heart, letting her blade sweep harmlessly past as she struck at his groin. Pathetic. The quick block of the knee as he swept her legs. Pointless. Long memory jabbed Miss Branwen hard in the throat before she could hope to retort, sending her stumbling back with a startled squawk. Had he willed it, he could have impaled her then and there, ending her miserable life. But he didn't, because that would have been a mercy. Death was mercy. There was no mercy today. And when she lunged at him anew, he showed her none. Counter. Parry. Riposte. 3 swift strokes battered her back, leaving her reeling, right arm drooping. You've hit your limit, my dear. Limit? A muscle jumped in her jaw. Limit. Her eyes blazed with fire afresh as the skies darkened above as clouds swarmed in. Osmond eyed them as one might a spring breeze, undaunted. Raven raised her right hand and screamed. I've got your limit right here. The heavens answered. His world went white. She'd done it. Raven descended to the dirt, broken and hurt, wasted and gasping for air, sweat beading upon her brow. The moment she struck the ground she fell down, all but collapsing on her hands and knees. There. That last strike had all the power of a maiden behind it. Not even Osmond could have escaped from that unscathed. If it hit. A voice hummed behind her. Unfortunately for you, I'm not so foolish as to tank an attack like that. Raven rounded on him with a whimper. He was bluffing, right? Right. Surely he was. Right. Still, I must admit that was impressive. He strode through the smoke and tapped his cane once against the ground with a smile, that same damn smile that she loathed for the last 10 years. Most impressive. But you are not a fully realized maiden yet, though it seems you have more mastery over your talents than I initially surmised. He spoke with that boy's mouth, but that patronizing tone was Osmond at his snarkiest. Congratulations. My opinion of you has risen ever so slightly, but it still won't save you. Raven recoiled. It can't be you. You're not Osmond. You're not. Correct. He granted her a lopsided smile. I am no longer Osmond. I am Ozma. There's a world of difference between the two, observe. His palm crashed into her chin from below and launched her into the sky, tumbling end over end. By the time she thought to right herself it was too late, she'd lost sight of him again. Stop. Calm down. She was in control here, she had the power, she was the strong one, no matter what anyone might think. If she could just kill him, he'd be out of her hair for a few weeks, and then she could move the tribe too. A sharp whistle rang behind her, bringing with it the bitter tang of humiliating and a searing red here in her cheeks. I recall you were often easily distracted in class, but do pay attention, Miss Branwen. She whirled. Too little, too late, and too slow. The boot found the back of her knee and broke it, obliterating the joint with an awful crunch. Down she went, yowling in pain. This won't stop me. She righted herself with a gust of air. I can fly. But how far can you fly? Osmond winced suddenly and held up a hand, much as she had for him only minutes ago. Yes, he muttered aside. I'll stop playing with my food, Naruto. Now, then what did you call this again? Raven heard the technique long before she saw Sid, a high-pitched almost subsonic whine drilling into her ears. Ah, yes. A small, grandfatherly smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I remember. Rasengan. The shadow fell over Raven. It swelled large, larger, largest, until its very shadow threatened to swallow her up. No fair, she shrank back, only to gasp as her mangled leg betrayed that. That's bullshit. You shouldn't be able to. As much as I'd like to stand around and monologue at you all day, I have other business to which I must attend. His smile didn't waver, not a once, and somehow that terrified her even more than the threat of her own impending demise. So in lieu of a long-winded speech, I'll just crush you now. Panic. She turned to cut a portal into the air. The moment she did, a golden hand clamped down on her shoulder, driving her forward into the ground. Now, don't run away. You're only making this harder on yourself. Ozma brought his hand and the Rasengan within down upon her. Raven felt her aura hold until it didn't. Her defenses fractured, cracked now, before finally shattered like so much brittle glass. And then there was pain. Her entire being tensed because she knew what was coming next. Oh God, she just knew. The old man wasn't the sort to let a prime opportunity like this pass him by and… Crack. It was easy to part the power from Raven. Simply reach down, pierce her soul, find the power and pull. Once upon a time doing so would have surely killed her, as it would have many a maiden before. But now he had control. Authority. Better yet, he had help, as it were, aid in this endeavor. Naruto and Kurama were there, aiding him, guiding him, taking the power not for themselves, but for him, ever so gently prying it free from Raven's soul and guiding it back into his own, with all the care of a practiced surgeon. It felt wonderful. This was only a fourth of his true power, a mere 25%, but he felt the difference straight away. As though he'd been dying of thirst for so long, only to stumble upon an oasis and drink his fill. Strength came rushing back into his soul, lighting the very fiber of his being afire with fresh power. Naturally, Naruto and Kurama noticed as well, but they didn't understand. He hadn't felt this powerful in centuries. Had he truly been so weak before? Raven writhed and squirmed and screamed as he sundered her soul, but he closed his heart to it and forged ahead. He'd reclaimed his power, now it was merely a matter of making certain she survived the extraction of said power. With this, the vault of Haven would remain sealed forevermore. Haven. Now there was an idea. Perhaps they should page in a visit after this. With his newfound allies, surely there was a way to stop Salem, and even if there wasn't, he could forestall her by using the last two questions. Yes, this life was meant to be a vacation, but he wasn't above making things better where he could, well he could. Leonardo would understand, surely. This was for the best. His old friend was ever the courageous sort. At the final gasp, Raven went limp beneath him, eyes rolling back in her head. Are you done? Ozpin nodded. I am. Good. Now move over. He ceded control gladly. Because you see, the moment Naruto took back the reins. Oh. He heard the baffled blonde hiss as he rubbed at his aching arms and legs with a hiss. Did you have to be so rough? I'm aching in places I didn't even know I had. Pretty sure you tore something. Had he? A flash of contrition flickered through his soul. Forgive me, I may have overdone it a tad in my excitement. Will you heal? Yeah, Naruto waved him off. I'll be fine. Just need a bit. Reclaiming that magic of yours that'll help you out, right? Ozpin hoped so. Anything that prolonged their union was surely a good thing. He had no desire to consume this boy. Naruto's gaze strayed to Raven's prone form, still sprawled out in the mud. What'd you want to do with her? Ozpin heaved a sigh. He had an idea, but Miss Branwen wouldn't be pleased when she woke up. Ah. What did he care about for such things? He wouldn't be around to her here raving. His weary, tired old soul dared a smile. Would you mind carrying her? Naruto huffed. Very much so. Why should I? I'll let you draw on her face. Heal. So this is Miss Trowel, then? Indeed. Naruto fought down a furious wince as Ozpin's voice hummed happily in the back of his head. Still took some getting used to, that. Magnificent, isn't it? Not quite the word he'd use. That said, it was certainly something. He considered the sprawling cityscape surrounding him with a keen eye, from its many ascending levels, the rising elevators, humid falls, and the constant chatter of the market in the air. It was enough to make a man reel. There were just so many people here, some of which gave him the occasional side eye, but none dared draw a weapon on him. That alone made this place civilized in a way the Branwen tribe could never be. With so much to see and do, he damn near found himself overwhelmed outright. "At your dust here. Freshly cut. Weapons for sale. Cabbages. Okay, scratch that. Definitely overwhelmed." He could feel his head spinning. Here at last, Osmond took pity on him. "No need to sound so surprised. Our worlds are quite different. I dare say you've never seen a city like this before. But beware. Mistral is a hive of scum and villainy. Let your guard down here and you'll be taken for a ride that may well end your life." Now there was a thought. We could clear them out before we leave. Osmond paused. Considered. That rather sounds like fun. Just like the old days. Old days? The wizard coughed. Even I was young once. Fair enough. Speaking of fun, you think Summer will appreciate the present we left her? Hashirama laughed first and this time, Osmond made no effort to mask his mirth, absolutely none whatsoever, as they bounded on in search of their first gang. "I dare say she will." Thud. Someone knocked on her door. Summer was armed and ready for it this time. Of course it helped that it was midday for one, not bloody midnight, and she wasn't distracted by looking after her girls, sleep or making sweet love to her husband. Didn't do anything for her mood, however. She flung the door open with a snarl. "Osmond, I swear to the brother god's raven." A raven it was indeed, her old teammate awaited her at her doorstep bound and gagged, hog-tied like some proverbial pig ripe for the feast. They'd even gone so far as to plug up her mouth with a juicy red apple for good measure. Despite that, her red eyes managed to fully convey the breadth of her terror. And well she should be afraid, for a smile split Summer's face, grinning ear to ear. Well, she crooned, crouching down. "What do we have here? Did Oz do this to you?" Raven howled furiously against her gag and thrashed against her bonds. "I thought so." Summer booped her nose with a gloved finger. "You had a bad time, didn't you?" Her old friend made more noises to that effect. Belatedly she noticed her burned clothing and the acrid scent of smoke clinging to her. At this range, it was impossible to ignore the bloodstains crisscrossing her body. Raven didn't need to speak to tell her what had transpired in Mistral. Seemed the Branwen tribe was no more. Oz had never been fond of bandits to begin with, least of all hers. Good riddance to bad rubbish, that lot. And yet he'd let Raven live. She had an inkling why. "I suppose you want me to let you go." Raven nodded rapidly. "I could do that." Sundered rose unfolded with an ominous clank and set itself against her throat. "Or I could just kill you." More gagged noises. The scowl rid her face. "Do you have any idea how much pain you caused me?" "Caused Yang?" "Tai. Don't get me started on poor Ruby. She keeps asking Crow about you, about when she'll get to meet her auntie, did you know that? You never even met her, and you've already broken her heart." Sundered rose bit into her neck, causing aura to spark. "Because that's just what you do, isn't you? You run away. From the fight, from responsibility, from everything. You break things, without a care for anyone else in the world." A bead of blood welled up from her throat. "Do you want to die, Raven?" Yang's egg donor shook her head. Summer made smug summer noises and stowed her trusty axe with a sneer. "I thought not." "Mom?" Yang's voice hallooed from upstairs. "Who's there? Who are you talking to?" Beaming, the silver-eyed warrior turned and hollered back into the house. "Yawn. Ruby. Go get you daddy. Mommy has a present for you." Raven whimpered into her gag, trembling with fear. It proved a lively afternoon. Osmond had missed many things about Mistral. Its art, its culture, its ability to adapt and thrive in the face of adversity. Not the stench. By the brothers, the smell. It reeked. Perhaps that was a bit gauche of him. Naruto scoffed as their shared body swayed aside from a fist, grabbed another, and snapped the arm holding it like a dry twig. "Do you think?" Osmond paused to ponder that as their victim screamed, a high reedy cry that soon faded to little more than a bass bleat as he retreated into his thoughts. Perhaps that was his fault. No, it most certainly was. When one lived for so long, one tended to have exacting standards, a bar that few, if any, could ever hope to measure up to. Naruto and Kurama had proven themselves the exception of the rule. That said, it remained rather refreshing to be a passenger again, let alone to two rather than one. It made for rather enlightening conversation. "My arm." Their latest victim yowled in agony. "You bastard. I'll kill." Thunk. The savage uppercut found their chin and sent them tumbling arse over elbows into a building. Osmond noted it with a half an ear, then turned back to the monster in the room. Or fox, in this case. "Now, where we?" I believe you said something about your own form of immortality. Are you implying that you can't die? Because if so, he truly pitied the eldritch being before him. Kurama offered the mental equivalent of a yawn as Naruto continued to lay waste to their enemies without, but it's hardly permanent or pleasant. On the off chance that some mortal manages to kill me or my host, I simply reform after a few years. It takes me decades to calm down again after the fact. Goodness. That sounded a great deal more painful than his version reincarnation. The idea of being sealed in the body of a stranger over and over, treated as a monster. He couldn't fathom it. That said, the great beast laid down beside him, considering him with a large eye. Why do you keep referring to yourself as Osman? I thought your name was Ozma. He shrugged the shoulder of his soul. Force of habit, I suppose. It's a way of preserving the memory of my last friend. Your last host, you mean? A frown followed those words. He was my friend, Kurama. I will remember him, even if none else does. An ominous crack reminded him of Naruto's battle, and he went back to watching the fray. Kurama hummed like a pleased parent. Impressive, isn't he? Osman found himself agreeing, despite his better judgment. Say what you would about Naruto being a bit dense when it came to the overtures of the fairer sex, but he was quite adroit when it came to the art of cracking skulls. All this without a single drop of chakra or any of his more destructive abilities. Made him proper restless, it did. He was brimming with magic now that the might of spring had been returned to him, his soul felt lighter, younger than it had been in years. Watching such slaughter only made him antsy, left him longing to throw down himself, hurl himself into the fray. On a whim, he sent a threat of inquiry his host's way. May I? I dunno. I don't like you taking control this often. In exchange for today's swap, I promise to teach you the best recipe for ramen. Fine, the blonde relented with a huff, but don't kill them. Osman chuckled. Worry not. Death is a mercy. I'm not feeling merciful. Blue eyes flashed gold. Ash kicked up their cane into his grasp and sauntered forward with a spring in his step. It felt so nice to have a body again, brief though it might be. He would make the most of this opportunity to stretch his legs as the saying went. Now, then. His cane tapped down, conjuring a wave of emerald green light. I believe the phrase is talk shit, get hit. Is that the slang you youngsters use these days? Ooh, fancy. One of his remaining would-be attackers, a rather ragged fellow bearing orange hair, a fat lip, and a black eye, well done, Naruto. Tried to act tougher than he truly was. Listen bub, you started this fight and this is the spider's turf, so turn out your pockets and maybe, we'll let you walk away with a few broken bones. Crack. Long memory flitted out and jabbed him in the chest, sending the poor man sprawling into his fellows. Osman waded in after them with a smile. I'm afraid it is far, far too late for that young man. What followed was a beatdown, pure and simple, hardly a noteworthy one at that. He thrashed each and every one of these so-called spiders within an inch of their lives, broke their bones, and left them for the authorities. Already he could hear the wail of sirens in the air. The message would be clear enough, he felt. On a whim, he paused to regard the deed. Roman, was it? He vaguely recalled this goon introducing himself before they jumped him and his allies. Perhaps you should consider a new career. Smiling, he dropped a wad of lean onto the young man's chest, humming a little when the man snatched at it. The doors of Beacon are ever open to those willing to better themselves. I'd think long and hard about that, were I you. The youth glared bloody red daggers at him and coughed once, then wise a lose wheeze. Who the hell are you? Osman tutted, feeling more alive than he'd ever been, merely a wandering hedge knight. Roman squinted at it. You're not wearing any armor. Easily remedied. He crouched down on his haunches to regard his potential student. You see, crime won't be a problem in Mistral. Not for much longer, little Miss Malachite, the Hana Guild, Black Sheep, and every other fiend in the city. Their days are numbered. I'm sure I'll have my pick of equipment along the way. I wouldn't want to be in Mistral here once I start taking down the major families. Roman gulped. Noted. On another whim, he handed him a card. What's this? Take that to Glinda Goodwitch at Beacon. Tell her an old friend sent you. If she asks, tell her a knight sent you. She will understand. As P said, Osman ceded control and let Naruto stumble to his feet. In a matter of moments they jogged away. Naruto was quick to start asking questions. You want to recruit him? Why? Have you not done the same with your own allies? Beacon needs all the help it can get. The ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as the blonde stopped by a nearby food stall. Of course, if you wish, we could stay after we wipe out the crime guilds, ask Leo to lead Haven in his place. No, no, no. Naruto crossed his arms in denial. I ain't being a headmaster. Not a chance. An idle thought, nothing more. Freedom of movement remains our greatest asset. Truth be told, it was tempting to stay here, to simply start afresh. Still, there was so much they might yet do. With his magic restored, he could. Kurama barked a laugh. Daydreaming again. Perhaps. Naruto coughed into a fist. Glad to hear the two of you getting along, but could someone give me directions? I have know where I'm going, and this bastard has been trying to sell me cabbages for the last 5 minutes. Had it been that long already? I thought up would be direction enough. Yeah, well, it ain't. He chuckled. Aim for the biggest building at the top. You can't miss it. Naruto rolled his eyes, shrugged, tensed his legs, and leaped, creating a shockwave in his wake. Great for him, not so the vendor who'd been harassing them. My cabbages. Osmond winced at his misery, but soon put the thought from his mind. Later. They could always pay the poor fellow back later. The vault of Haven awaited them. It all sounded so simple on paper. Step 1. Slip into Haven Academy undetected. Step 2. Open the vault, snag the relic, exhaust its remaining questions. Step 3. Abscond said relic and leave the way they'd come, with no one the wiser. Really, Naruto should have known better, in part because no plant survived contact with the enemy. In this case it wasn't even an enemy they encountered, but people. So many people. He thought Haven would be empty this time of year, and while the place wasn't packed according to Osmond at any rate, he still hadn't expected to find so many people milling about the foyer. Something about an open house. He vaguely recalled one of the adults saying something along those lines. Far from the ideal scenario they wished for, let alone needed. They encountered more than a few passerby. Mommy, who's that? SHHH. Not so loud purr. He waved a hand towards the little redeed and was rewarded with a happy chirrup and a giggle besides before her mother ushered her away. Cute kid. Seems familiar. The Naiko's family is rather well known around these parts, as much for producing skilled warriors as the Arcs of Vale. A shame her mother is currently spoken for. His brow furrowed. You trying to give me a nudge or something? Perish the thought. I merely believe you could stand to be happier. Pleasant company is the salve to a weary soul. Fiiiiiine. That said, there's a wealth of promising talent here. If properly cultivated. The blonde huffed and Kurama with him. Still not becoming a teacher. It was worth a shot, I suppose. Naruto was suspicious, and he supposed he had good reason to be. Their working partnership was still a bit of a tenuous one. True trust would come in time. To the vault, then. Might as well. He shrugged a shoulder. There should be at least 2 questions remaining. We should use them. Got anything to ask? After careful consideration, yes. How to defeat Salem. Not destroy. He saw now the error of his words back then. Jin likes to be literal with her answers, so you must phrase them carefully. I say we should try to save Salem. There may not be anything left to save. Sid'll want to try. Got a second question for us. As to the other, how to save this young man's soul. But he didn't have the strength to say that aloud. Not just yet. In the end, they ended up waiting for the better part of 2 hours, feeling like a pair of fools all the while until finally, the place cleared out. Only once it was did they dare make for the statue of Jin. Yes, they had this. What could possibly go wrong? You just had to say it, didn't you, Osmond? Young man. Sure enough, an unfamiliar yet strangely familiar voice called to him before they could think to break the chains binding the statue's lift in place. I say, young man. Someone came racing down the steps at speed and, much to his chagrin, he found that he recognized him. What are you doing? Get away from that statue at once. It's not a toy. Osmond blew out an annoyed breath in the back of his mind. Of all the timing, no, wait. Perhaps he could use this. There was something he wanted to confirm. Ah, Leonardo. He poked Naruto and asked the blonde to speak for him, as he seemed loath to give up control. Good of you to come. I'd hoped to have a word with you. The Frontis headmaster blinked. Have we met? Blue eyes narrowed upon him intently. Can we have a word in your office? Naruto dug his heels in immediately thereafter. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't like the feel of this guy. Osmond was quick to reassure him otherwise. This isn't the first time he dealt with blondes before. How bad could it be? The Yank sneezed heavily. Why did he have the feeling someone was talking about him? Nonsense, surely. Everything was fine. Yup. Fine. Just fine. Everything was not fine. Naruto ducked a clumsy blow, swept a fist outward and flattened Leonardo against the wall. There had been a time when Haven's headmaster had been something of a skilled combatant, no longer. Or perhaps Naruto was simply that skilled. Regardless, the outcome was never in question. 3 seconds was all it took to disarm him and divest him of his weapon, to send him sprawling across the floor. Once upon a time, Osmond might have sought to stop him. Now. He watched. Leonardo Lionheart was a traitor. How the word burned. How it saddened Osmond so. How it wounded his weary soul. In truth, he wasn't even angry, just disappointed. Betrayal was something he'd come to expect, but not like this. Never like this. Naruto had sensed the seer hidden behind the man's wall, and things had snowballed from there. Lie after lie. Trick after trick. Soon enough the man's deception was laid bare. His cane had flicked out, found the false door and smashed it open, slaying the Grim before it had the chance to commune with its mistress. Lionheart had tried to flee in the chaos, lending further credence to his guilt. They would not allow it. Naruto had, quite literally, beaten the answers out of him. The rest, as they say, was history, and what an ugly tapestry that history was. Now the headmaster lay sprawled at their feet, babbling wildly, sweat beating upon his brow. You must understand, I did what I had to in order to survive, to protect Haven. By sacrificing good men and women to her. He couldn't quite keep the bite from his voice. How many huntsmen and huntresses did you send to their deaths? 50 so far. Naruto choked at that, but Leo was deaf to it. I remember each one. I've learned this much, take what you can, when you can, so long as you can live to see another day. Oh Leo. What happened to you? He screamed at him. You left me, Osban. You left. And she came. The words washed over him in a wave. This mustn't register on an emotional level. Emotional level. Naruto railed at him. He betrayed you us. And all those people, for crying out loud. I think this warrants an emotional response. No. Lionheart flung up an arm. You'll never take me alive. Crack. Naruto's fist barreled into his jaw with a thunderous clap. A bloody tooth barreled through the air. Perhaps he had the right of it. Now was not the time for words. Not anymore. Tell me, Naruto, are you familiar with the term discombobulate? A little. Then this is what we will do. A brief burst of moves and stances flashed through his head. He rather liked the look of them. Osban, please. Leonardo stumbled back to try and ward him off. Be sensible about this. His eyes flashed with fire. Osban isn't here right now. Naruto struck like lightning. The blurred leg struck the headmaster's former now in his eye's knee with a devastating crack to obliterate the joint there with a wet crack and deprive him of balance. From there he clapped both hands to either side of his ears, deafening. A Rasengan found him as he dropped to a knee with a yowl, shattering his aura to launch him across the office. Naruto didn't give him time to rise, much less to call for reinforcements. He descended upon with silently fury, a whirl of feet and fists. The outcome was never in question, the result rooted in stone. By the end Leonardo was quivering mess at his feet, battered, bloody, and broken. That was the logical thing to do. The man was wild, nearly hysteric really, eyes wide, stance rigid, panicked little gasps of fear fleeing from his lips. Surely you can see that. Logic. I do this for my own happiness and of my own volition. He could feel Ozma's anger bleeding through his own, it made grip the man's mane tight, drawing an agonized cry from the faunus. I won't let my guard down like last time, or be caught unawares again. I won't be taken by surprise and we will protect everyone. Challenge us if you dare. Leonardo whimpered and tried to crawl away from them. Please mercy. Mercy? Naruto paused, considering. For you. There is no mercy. He raised his boot and brought it down on Lionheart's head. The people of Mistral looked up as their city trembled. Most dismissed it as an earthquake, the fools. None noticed the death of a traitor. Allow me to show you the way to the vault. They descended into darkness, such as it was. His stomach lurched, but the descent was mercifully brief. Just beyond that, the beauty of the vault awaited. Its majesty wasn't lost on him, a grand open cavern awaited them as the lift descended and the elevator grill peeled back to reveal the wonders beyond. He could feel an old magic in this place, something ancient, powerful. With that in mind, he strode forward, head on a swivel. There had to be more than that, a tick of some sort, one final last-ditch desperate attack. Yet none came. All too easy. Was this a trap, then? Maybe a ruse? Lionheart would have allies here, or there would a trap of some sort he trip, WHCH would cause the cavern to self-destruct and bring everything crashing down on his head. But it didn't. His and Kurama's senses were stretched to the max, but he couldn't sense anyone down here. Could it finally be that easy? Was his luck finally turning for the better? When his paranoia had finally been sated, he willed himself to cover the rest of the distance. He walked right up to the vault, laid his hand on the door, and it opened. Just like that. His eyes flickered with azure fire, and one by one, the golden fans clicked apart, folding inward upon themselves to reveal that which lay beyond. An arid dimension of scorching heat and sand with no end in sight in there. Sitting upon a stone pedestal. That's it, then. Indeed it is. May I? No. He shut Osban down with a shake of the head. I want to do this. It has to be me. This felt important. I'm afraid I must insist. Boy. He pursed his lips. Remember, Oz, at the end of the day, this is my body. You're just a guest, one I've been humoring. In other words, behave. Kurama rumbled a warning of his own. When no further protest was made, so too did Naruto make his move. He strode forth into the portal, claimed the lamp, and marched back out, uncaring as the vault shimmered and closed behind him. He barely noticed, he only had eyes for the relic. All gilded gold and blue, it seemed to shimmer under his gaze, waiting for him. How do we use this? Ozma hesitated. Hey, don't blink on me now. What happened to all that trust? My apologies. Old habits die hard, I suppose. Her name is Jin. Speak it to summon her. This seemed as good a place as any. Isolated, away from prying eyes, with none to interfere. Lifting his chin, he fixed the lamp with a stare. Jin. And the world stopped. Time itself ground to a halt, as though someone had simply reached down and stopped the hands on a clock. The genie didn't so much arrive as she did appear, there was an important distinction between the two. Arriving implied they'd been waiting for her, appearing meant she was, quite suddenly, there. And she was, with a rush of blue smoke emanating from the relic, looming over them both. She was certainly very tall. And rather blue. Naked, too. His mind fizzled out spectacularly as his face flushed red like roses. Beautiful. That was the first coherent thought that sprang to mind. Oz hadn't mentioned this. On. She stretched both arms above her head with a pleased sigh. It did fascinating things to her chest and fixed him with a lazy smile. Well, isn't this interesting? Ordinarily, I would introduce myself, but I suspect you know who I am already. A coy smile touched her full lips as she stared at them overlong. Isn't this interesting? It seems you're not pulling the strings for once, old man. Ozpin coughed in Naruto's head. Yes, well, we've agreed to work together. I can hear you in there, you know. Those ancient blue eyes fixed upon the three of them then, deeper and darker than the greatest of seas. Still, any change is a good one, I suppose. Alighting in the air like a graceful goddess, she laid one hand upon her chin and tilted her head. I suppose you have questions, her voice crooned at them. To remain the Sierra. She winked Naruto's way, drawing a sputter from the poor blonde. By all means, ask away, handsome. Ozpin coughed in his ear. Slowly, now, my friend. We must phrase our questions carefully. Naruto beat him to it, bless his simple soul. How do I save Salem? The immortal balked. Naruto, no. Naruto, yes. Jin grinned, quite pleased. Sure enough, she showed them. So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video, bye bye.